This book takes a look at the forms of Taekwondo and applies grappling techniques to those movements. Hi guys, my name is Joe, and this is my channel, Fighting Words, the Martial Arts Library. And on this channel, I review martial arts books and I talk about other martial arts related subjects. The subject of today's book review is Taekwondo Grappling Techniques, published in 2009. The authors are Dr. Tony Kimmerly and Steve Snyder. Now, Dr. Kimmerly has his doctorate in biomechanics. Mr. Snyder has been involved in martial arts for a very long time. He's got black belts under both Joe Louis and Bill Superfoot Wallace. There does seem to be an inconsistency here when it comes to their Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt ranks. They are listed as black belts on the back cover. That was in 2009. They are listed as black belts on the website. In the About the Author section toward the end of the book, Dr. Kimmerly is listed as a purple belt, and Mr. Snyder is listed as a brown belt. I don't know what caused that inconsistency. I would suggest perhaps when they began the book, those might have been their ranks, but it is an unusual thing to see in the book. However, again, at the time of this recording, they are both black belts. Now, what this book tries to tackle, as I mentioned in the intro, is that it takes a look at the movements from the different Taekwondo patterns, and it tries to look for grappling applications for them. Chapter 1 starts off with a history of Taekwondo as well as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Included in this is a section on the connection between Taekwondo and Shotokan and the development of forms as a whole, as well as forms in Taekwondo in particular. It ends with a small little blurb about don't assume that a movement means X just because it's labeled as X. In Chapter 2, we get grappling applications for basic blocks, and similarly, Chapter 3, we get grappling applications for basic strikes. For my money, that is the most useful section of the book. I'll be getting into why once we get more into it. The short version is that these take short movements and give them, in what most cases would be, a very obvious application. For instance, there's what they call a scissor block, and their application for it is to scoop the opponent's legs with one hand and push down on their torso with another. That makes sense. Some of the more elaborate applications when we get into the forms is a little bit different. The forms are covered in chapters 4 through 15, and each form gets its own chapter. Now, at the beginning of that, we get a description of the form, and following that, we get applications that are almost always given for a 2-move sequence in the form. The grappling techniques that they show typically consist of things like throws, standing locks, a few standing chokes, some grab releases, some off-balancing movements. There's a little bit in the way of groundwork. Some of my issues with this, there are some sequences that only work if the guy grabs a hold of you and holds on for dear life while you're doing what you're doing, which is not something I typically see in real life. Some of the sequences, a pet peeve of mine, they're showing how to defend a wrestling shot by doing like a double block, and the guy doing the wrestling shot is doing a terrible, terrible job. He's dropping to a knee like 3 feet away from the guy. You don't do that. There's one sequence where you're defending against a lapel grab and you're grabbing it and attacking, and then you're switching off the grip as you turn your back to the guy, and just that seems hazardous. Again, a lot of these sequences do seem to rely on the guy just grabbing a hold of you and holding on and letting you do whatever you're doing instead of adapting to whatever it is you're doing. And I don't know if I've ever seen that happen when people were like legitimately going at it. And I don't mean like trained and experienced grapplers. I mean, you know, people who aren't trained, if they grab you and you start to pull your hand away, they're going to do something to adjust. If you re-grab, again, it's going to change things. So that's a lot of my issue with the sequences in here. With that being said, it does cover many forms. It does have several ideas. Some are good, some maybe not so much. I'm trying to not let my own bias affect this too much, in that just because I wouldn't use that sequence in that way doesn't make it bad. But some of it is just not good. I am surprised given the author's grappling backgrounds. However, that is that, and I'm going to repeat that during the cons. So let's get into the pros and cons. As far as the pros go, they have color photos, which are excellent for things like this. It comes with a DVD, so you can use that to review what's going on in the book by seeing like the live action going on in the film. And if you come from a Taekwondo background, this might give you some new ideas from techniques you're familiar with. As far as the cons go, I've already covered it a lot. There are some dubious grappling sequences here. I don't want to cover ground that I already have, but if there is a con to this, the biggest outstanding thing is, like they're doing a choke, like a rear choke with their arms straight out because it fits the form. And they know better. They should. Like somebody who's been doing grappling long enough knows there's a reason that you take this, you put it, behind the guy's head at least. You don't have it hanging out because this is not a secure grip. But that's one of the applications that's shown. And as I was doing this review, I had to flip through and reread that section just to make sure that that's where the technique stopped. And it did. They didn't say anything about adjusting it to a better position. This is the move they want you to do based on the moves in the form. It's not good. It is in fact bad. Now, that's not it throughout the book, but there are enough of that in the book that it's a pretty serious con, right? The other negative to it that I noticed was that it's covering sections of the forms instead of the entire form A to Z. That's not a big strike against it, but I think if you are a practitioner of Taekwondo and you use these particular forms, you might find yourself wanting more when you get to those sections. Recommendations. I've harped on how much I dislike the grappling contained in here. But if you come from a style of Taekwondo that utilizes these forms, and you want to get some ideas about how to use the movements of your forms in a grappling setting, there are some things in here that I think could be useful. I would suggest, however, that you have a rudimentary grappling background in something like Judo or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so that you can recognize the bad grappling when you see it. However, again, if I were to recommend this to someone, it would be someone with a background in Taekwondo so that they can see some of the applications of these forms. I'm not a Taekwondo practitioner, I'm a karate practitioner. There is a link between the two. So I got it primarily to check out the grappling applications mostly of the blocks and strikes that they had in the first couple of chapters to sort of get an idea for what in karate we would call bunkai application. I think, as I mentioned up top, a lot of those applications and those chapters make more sense than some of them that we see in the other chapters when it comes to the forms. So that's all I have for this week. I apologize if this has been a bit of a downer, but I don't know. It's a really well put together book, and the fact that the production quality was so high that they made a DVD that you can go through and check, I love that. I absolutely love that, and I think it should happen more. But as someone who has an interest in practical application of forms, I was sort of disappointed by the end product, which is why this review isn't tremendously upbeat. With that being said, I do appreciate that you guys have stuck around for the whole thing, and I will see you next week.